Okay, here we are, next morning. This has probably had, I don't know, 16 or 18 hours. This, on the last batch, certainly almost 24, or at least 20 on the first batch that we poured. This is rigid. Our flashing, our overflow will come off, and it's stretchy and very rubbery. There is a stage here after gelling and prior to being completely cured that if you're in a real rush, you want to be careful that you don't go, get involved with it too early, even though it may seem rubbery. Depending on the product, that stage in between can be more pronounced or less so, but if you make the mistake of demolding, if it's not completely stretchy rubber, it'll deform over the forces that it takes to get this taken apart, and then you end up with nothing usable again. So you want to be careful of that. But we can be sure that our flashing is not tearing on us and is quite rubbery. All of our buckets, we can essentially make sure all of the batches have cured, which they have. I'm going to get them out of the way. I was not reusing, these are brand new to mix this material, but I will just pull this flashing out of these pails when I have a moment. It basically comes out in one piece, and they can be reused for other things. They're a couple dollars each, so let's be smart about it, right? All right, so we can take our clamps off. Now, I may not have mentioned, this is difficult to do with one hand to begin with. But it also, this is a one-piece mold. There's two pieces to a matrix mold. But as far as parts of the mold, partings, this is a one piece. It's an open cavity. This is the cavity. There isn't a second piece that would complement this first one and go on this top. Other side, it's a one-piece matrix mold. Therefore, when I'm talking about clamping it or unclamping it, or taking the jacket off of the pattern's in here, but the pattern's on a sheet of melamine. It's on a sheet of sawdust board that has laminate right on it. So rather than having sawdust board and putting laminate on it, it can be purchased with a hard surface on it, and that's called melamine. And it makes a non-permeable, plasticky surface on a 3/4 inch piece of fiberboard, which is quite rigid. So rather than a solid piece of plastic or something like that, which would be hard to come by and kind of expensive, I use melamine around the shop pretty often. And that's the last clamp here. Oh, I'll pop it off of there. All right, now we're sitting down, and we'll pop the tape off. Now, I said before, the adhesive is latex-based, and if this rubber made it out underneath the jacket to the tape here, the tape was there to keep it from leaking out. But if it made it there and touched down, there was the potential for the cure of the rubber to fail. But that's all right, because as you'll see, we don't need the rubber to be cured here. We don't even need it to be cured all the way back till there. The jacket footprint is larger than the matrix footprint by almost an inch. So we'll get our tape off, and we'll wad that up and send that to the landfill. And now we'll get a couple bars. We had them. There they are. A couple pry bars. And we'll use our pry points here that we'll talk about another time, but it gives us a place to get a hold of this. Kind of pop. Pop, pop. You can hear it kind of tearing open, which is a good sign. I'm going to get these pails out of the way. I'm still in my slippers here this morning because I'm just so excited. It's like Christmas. We worked so hard. I mean, there's probably nearly 40 hours in the project here so far, just to get to a point where we find out if we've ruined it. and it's not going to work, but there's a small chance of that. But let's try and be more optimistic, shall we? Now I'm going to keep that up, and I'm going to add something to maintain the gap, and that'll let me actually pry a little more effectively. Now I can be sure that this is let go. So actually, ideally, rather than levering around the corner by peeling this off or trying to pull straight up, I'm actually going to invert this whole thing. It's a really kind of heavy here now that the rubber's in there. And you can see our screws go through the melamine and into the pattern, so that we could be sure that when we added rubber here, that the pattern didn't just float up into the rubber onto the, or float up into that based on the fact that it might be a lighter density or less dense than the rubber. That would be undesirable. And there we go. Oh, the screws. That's what we... So there is so much perfect engagement. I mean, pouring up that rubber against that pattern has been so perfectly tight that it actually tore the screws out of the pattern rather than taking the pattern out of the rubber. No problem. But it's just remarkable how that goes. I think we might need to come back after we do a little reconnoiter here. This is going to take some wrestling to get out of here. I will touch on the fact that one of the benefits of a jacket matrix mold are that the jacket can come off first and then the rubber, which gives you the ability to wrestle this off. And when this is perfectly, how do I want to put this? The idea of pouring a fluid into this mold to cast against this surface, or when we're initially building it, pouring the fluid rubber against the pattern, it engages so perfectly and builds such a perfect vacuum there. It's very difficult to initially get off. But the nice thing about a rubber matrix is that it can be inverted like a sock and sort of, and that makes it a lot handier than if it were monolithic, like we were talking before, trying to rip, at the scale we are now, trying to rip a solid piece out of slightly flexible rubber is more of a problem depending on the geometry. When it's a thin layer, it's easily pulled off. And that is easy on the mold, and it's easy on the casting. And that's one of the factors of using the matrix mold, one of the many factors that make it more desirable. Because if you're cycling it 20 or 30 times, or you need 20 or 30 pieces, being rough with a monolithic mold at this scale to get a rigid casting out of the semi-rigid mold, I mean, that's the idea of the rubber, is that you have some flexibility, no pun intended. But excuse me, it is easier on everything to be able to take it apart in pieces and work by inverting this to get it off of that pattern. It just gives everything a little bit of a break, which is important. So unfortunately, I can't get two hands on this the way I need to, but I will get it started, and then we'll come back and look at that once I don't need both hands.